Evelyn Monroe stood quietly by her desk in the glass-walled office overlooking the Seattle skyline. At 50, she was a seasoned architect of software systems. Having devoted over 12 years to Fortis Technologies, a mid-sized software company nestled in the heart of the city's tech district. Unlike the flashy executives who loved the spotlight, Evelyn worked behind the scenes, crafting the invisible backbone that kept the company alive. She wasn't one for grand speeches or aggressive ambition. Her passion was making complex systems hum flawlessly, even when no one noticed. For more than a decade, Evelyn had weathered storms, leadership changes, near mergers, and data breaches that threatened the company's future. Yet, through it all, she remained steadfast, leading her team with quiet confidence. The core platform she had painstakingly rebuilt 6 years ago after a disastrous acquisition had become the company's lifeline, quietly fueling most of Fortis's revenue. But now, as a new CEO, Lucas Grant strode into the building with sharp suits and sharper words. Evelyn felt the unsettling chill of change. She knew this wasn't just another corporate shuffle, it was a storm brewing. And she was the one holding the thunder. Evelyn Monroe never expected that a simple calendar invite could change everything. It was a Thursday morning when she saw the meeting request pop up. No agenda, no context, just discussion with Lucas Grant. She'd been with Fortis Technologies for over a decade, quietly building the backbone of the company's operations. She thought she knew her place. She thought she was secure. But security is a fragile illusion in the world of corporate power. Lucas Grant, the new CEO, was the embodiment of polished ambition. At 38, he was young, charismatic, and full of sharp ideas that made board members sit up and take notice. He carried himself with the confident ease of someone who believed the world owed him everything, and expected results yesterday. His office overlooked the city like a glass fortress, a perfect symbol of his outlook, clean, shiny, and unyielding. When Evelyn stepped into his office that morning, she noticed instantly the coldness in the air. There was no warmth in his greeting, no handshake, no casual, "good morning." Just the glint of a man with a script he was ready to deliver. "Evelyn," Lucas said, barely looking up from his tablet. "We're restructuring. Your role has been deemed redundant. Effective immediately." The words hit her like a blow. Not because she doubted the statement, they were clear and final, but because of the way they were delivered. Clinical, dismissive, like she was a piece of outdated hardware to be unplugged and discarded. She blinked, trying to process the shock. But Evelyn was not a woman who crumbled easily. She'd faced crises before, a merger that almost crushed Fortis, a data breach that sent the company spiraling, but this felt different. This was personal. This was a challenge to her entire existence within the company she had helped build. "Are you serious?" she managed, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her. Lucas smirked, the smugness of someone who thought he'd won the game before it even began. "You've had a good run, Evelyn, but we need speed, new energy, fresh ideas. You understand, don't you?" She did, but not in the way he expected. She looked him straight in the eye and said quietly, "I understand more than you think." What Lucas didn't realize, what no one did, was that Evelyn Monroe was more than just an employee. She was the architect, the unseen force behind Fortis's entire operational infrastructure. 6 years ago, when the company was reeling from a failed acquisition that nearly sank its healthcare division, Evelyn had done what seemed impossible. She had rebuilt the company's core system architecture from the ground up, designing it to be scalable, secure, and resilient. And more importantly, she had patented that design under her own name. The licensing agreement she negotiated with the former CEO had quietly protected her intellectual property, ensuring that Fortis Technologies could use the system only under a renewable license, one that required explicit approval from both parties every 3 years. Lucas had never read that contract. He didn't know that firing Evelyn meant not just losing a lead architect, but losing the legal right to operate the system itself. As she left his office, Evelyn was calm, methodical. She gathered a few personal belongings, a worn notebook filled with schematics, her daughter's drawing taped inside a desk drawer, and walked out the door without a scene. Some colleagues avoided her eyes. Others looked relieved, but Evelyn's mind was racing. Not with fear or anger, but with strategy. That evening, alone in her small apartment overlooking Puget Sound, Evelyn pulled out the original employment contract. She read the IP clause carefully, feeling a quiet satisfaction as she saw her name clearly printed beneath the patent ID. The license to use the system was set to expire that coming Sunday at midnight unless renewed by her. The clock was ticking. Unlike most people who might have reacted with outrage or desperation, Evelyn chose silence and calculation. She drafted a formal, precise email to Fortis's legal department and Lucas Grant himself. There were no threats, no accusations, just facts. The subject line read, "Notice of system licensing expiration. Immediate attention required." She attached a scanned copy of the contract, highlighted the relevant sections, and sent the message with a calm certainty that only years of quiet endurance could build. Saturday passed in a blur of cold air and quiet walks by the waterfront. Evelyn avoided her phone, knowing that patience was her ally. Sunday afternoon, still no reply, no calls from legal, no frantic emails from Lucas. Perfect. She spent the last few hours meticulously organizing her archives, version logs, design notes, process documentation, everything dated and detailed. This wasn't to prove anything. Evelyn didn't need to prove her value. She already knew it. This was to prepare for the inevitable reckoning. At 11:59 p.m. Sunday, with a glass of red wine in hand, Evelyn watched the license expire. Fortis Technologies was now operating its entire system illegally. Monday dawned quietly. Evelyn packed her daughter's lunch, sipped coffee, and read the first frantic messages from former colleagues. Nicole, from Product Operations. Evelyn, did you shut it down? 2 minutes later. Greg from Client Services. Are you seeing what's happening? It's chaos. By 8:15 a.m., the company's core systems were paralyzed. No client dashboards. No payroll. No internal communication tools. No analytics. The help desk portal displayed only a blank screen. Behind the scenes, Fortis's leadership was scrambling. Lucas was pacing, barking orders at engineers who had no idea why the systems were failing. Legal teams were digging through paperwork, trying to find a loophole. The company was unraveling. And Evelyn? She was at home, still in sweatpants, watching the notifications flood in with a detached calm. They had ignored her warning. And now they were paying the price. At 9:15 a.m., Lucas's call started, 4 attempts before Evelyn finally answered. His voice was strained, far from the confident CEO she had met weeks ago. "We need to talk," he said. "The system's down. Clients are calling non-stop. We need your help." Evelyn smiled, not out of malice, but because this was the moment she had been waiting for. She told him plainly, "I'm not coming back as your employee. If you want to continue using my system, we need a new licensing agreement. On my terms." Lucas paused, stunned by her firmness. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." That call marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where Evelyn Monroe reclaimed her power not through anger, but through strategy, knowledge, and an unshakable belief in her own worth. The days following Evelyn Monroe's bold phone call to Lucas Grant felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a chasm of uncertainty. Fortis Technologies was gripped by chaos. The core system's blackout revealing the fragile dependency the entire company had on the architecture she alone controlled. What had once been invisible and taken for granted was now glaringly exposed. Lucas, once brimming with the confident swagger of a CEO in control, was now reduced to a man scrambling for solutions. The board of directors was in an uproar, demanding answers, while the company's legal department scrambled to understand the contractual disaster that had just unfolded. Every attempt to patch the system without Evelyn's cooperation was like trying to hold back a flood with bare hands. On Tuesday morning, Evelyn received an unexpected email from the company's general counsel, Thomas Riley. The tone was formal but tinged with urgency. "Ms. Monroe, we request an immediate meeting to discuss potential paths forward regarding the licensing situation. Please advise your availability." Evelyn knew this was the moment to set the tone for negotiations. She replied with one condition: a face-to-face meeting only if the company agreed to treat her as an independent contractor. not an employee. And if the licensing fees were discussed transparently, her terms were clear and uncompromising. That afternoon, as Evelyn prepared for the meeting, her phone buzzed with texts and calls from former colleagues. Some expressed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few warned her about the risks she was taking. But Evelyn felt an unexpected surge of calm. For the first time in years, she was playing the game on her own terms. The meeting was held in a stark conference room on the 10th floor of Fortis's headquarters. The air was thick with tension as Evelyn walked in, carrying a slim portfolio containing meticulously organized documents, contracts, system schematics, logs of updates, and email chains confirming the licensing expiry. Lucas Grant was already seated, flanked by Thomas Riley and two senior members of the operations team. His face was pale, his usual poise replaced by tight lines and restless eyes. "Ms. Monroe," Thomas began, "we acknowledge the lapse in license renewal was an oversight on our part. It was never our intention to disregard your contributions or the terms of your contract." Evelyn raised a hand gently to pause him. "This wasn't just an oversight. It was a systemic failure to understand the foundation of your own company. You fired the architect of your critical systems without reviewing the contracts, without consulting your legal team. That is negligence." Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but Evelyn held his gaze firmly. "Let's be clear. The system I designed accounts for 85% of your operational infrastructure. Rebuilding it is not an option. It would take years and cost millions you don't have. The license renewal isn't negotiable. What is negotiable are the terms under which you continue to use it." She laid out her proposal. A 12-month non-exclusive licensing agreement with a fee of $1.02 million. Payable quarterly in advance. Public acknowledgement of her authorship would appear in all client-facing materials and investor reports. Support would be provided only under a separate consulting contract. No backdoors. No informal handovers. Lucas's jaw tightened. "That's a steep price." Evelyn's smile was calm but unwavering. "It's the fair price of running your company's engine." The room fell silent. The legal team scribbled notes. The operations heads exchanged glances. And Lucas's bravado cracked just enough to reveal the weight of the consequences he hadn't anticipated. As the negotiations unfolded over the next few days, the unexpected event that shook Fortis deeper than the system outage emerged. The media caught wind of the story. A tech news site ran a headline: "Former architect holds Fortis Technologies hostage. How one woman's patent stalled a multi-million-dollar software company." Suddenly, Evelyn Monroe was thrust into a spotlight she never sought. She had always been the quiet force behind the scenes. But now, she was a public symbol of quiet strength and strategic savvy. The company's stock wavered, clients called with concerns, and shareholders demanded swift resolution. The pressure mounted on Lucas and the board to find a deal before the situation escalated into a full-blown crisis. Through it all, Evelyn remained composed. She declined media interviews, refused to engage in public drama, and focused instead on strengthening her position through clear communication and steadfast terms. The unexpected event, however, was not just external. Within Fortis, fractures appeared. Loyal engineers who had admired Evelyn reached out privately, offering support and urging the company to settle quickly. Some senior leaders quietly questioned Lucas's handling of the crisis. And then came the unanticipated blow from an unlikely source. One of Fortis's largest clients threatened to terminate their contract, citing operational instability and lost trust. Lucas called Evelyn urgently one evening. "This could sink us. We need a resolution now." Evelyn felt a cold satisfaction. But she stayed firm. "Then act quickly. I'm ready to finalize, but only on my terms." The deal was sealed a week later. Evelyn signed a licensing agreement that acknowledged her ownership and outlined her consulting role. The system came back online. But the lesson was etched deeply into Fortis's culture. Underestimate the quiet ones, and you risk everything. After the dust settled from the crisis, the atmosphere at Fortis Technologies was palpably different. The chaos of the system outage and the subsequent licensing standoff had forced a reckoning that no one on the leadership team had anticipated. For the first time, the company's executives and board members had to confront a truth they'd long ignored. The foundation of Fortis's success wasn't flashy presentations or visionary speeches, but the painstaking work of people like Evelyn Monroe. Lucas Grant, once the untouchable CEO with a silver tongue and polished suits, found himself facing uncomfortable realities. The board had made it clear that his mishandling of the licensing issue had cost the company dearly. Not just in lost revenue, but in reputation and trust. Whispers of dissent floated in the hallways, and Evelyn's quiet influence was becoming impossible to ignore. Evelyn, meanwhile, had settled into her role as a consultant with a calm confidence. No longer an employee shackled by corporate politics, she now operated on her own terms, empowered by the recognition of her intellectual property and expertise. But this new chapter came with its own challenges. She was invited to a private meeting with the board of directors, an unusual move for someone outside the company hierarchy. The chairman, a silver-haired woman named Margaret Cole, greeted Evelyn with a firm handshake and direct gaze. "Ms. Monroe," Margaret began, "we want to hear your perspective on how Fortis can rebuild, not just its systems, but its culture and trust, with employees and clients alike." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for the opportunity. The technology is only as strong as the people who design, maintain, and innovate it. Leadership must shift from focusing on titles and control to valuing expertise and collaboration." She described how the company's previous leadership had treated foundational systems and the people behind them as expendable parts. "When you undervalue the architects of your core infrastructure, you risk downtime, client trust, and ultimately, your future." Margaret listened intently, her expression softening. "How would you approach leadership if you were in charge?" Evelyn took a deep breath. "First, by naming mistakes honestly and acknowledging where leadership failed. Second, by stopping the promotion of ego over expertise. And third, by building safeguards that don't rely on any one individual's title or presence to keep the company stable." She elaborated on the importance of transparency, regular communication, and empowering teams to speak up without fear. She stressed that recognizing intellectual property and giving credit where it's due was not just legal protection, it was about respect and morale. Her words resonated deeply with the board members. For many, it was a wake-up call. The shift was palpable. Where once there had been defensiveness and denial, now there was a cautious openness. Evelyn also shared how leadership had to embrace humility. You can't rebuild trust by ignoring past mistakes or blaming individuals. It starts with owning the truth and committing to better practices. The meeting ended with Margaret's promise to initiate changes in leadership training, employee recognition, and corporate governance. She acknowledged that Evelyn's role was no longer just as a consultant, but as a vital voice in steering Fortis toward a more resilient future. Outside the boardroom, Evelyn felt a subtle shift in the company's atmosphere. Where once her presence had been met with awkward avoidance or quiet skepticism, now colleagues greeted her with nods of respect and genuine interest. Some even sought her out for advice, eager to learn from the woman who had not only saved their systems but challenged their culture. Even Lucas, though still clinging to his title, began to show signs of change. Their interactions were more measured, less confrontational. He asked questions, listened carefully, and for the first time, seemed willing to learn from Evelyn's experience. Evelyn also took time to meet with her former team members, some of whom had been uncertain or disillusioned during the upheaval. She encouraged open dialogue about their frustrations, hopes, and ideas for improvement. Her approach was empathetic but firm. Progress required honesty, accountability, and a commitment to valuing every contributor's voice. As weeks passed, Evelyn led workshops on intellectual property rights, system security, and collaborative leadership. Her presence fostered a new culture of respect and shared responsibility. Employees began to feel seen, heard, and valued. The change in perspective extended beyond internal company walls. Clients who had experienced the chaos of the outage reached out with cautious optimism, impressed by Fortis's transparency and renewed commitment to quality and reliability. Investor confidence slowly stabilized, but perhaps the most profound shift was within Evelyn herself. No longer the quiet architect hidden behind screens and code. She had emerged as a leader, resilient, strategic, and unapologetically confident in her worth. Looking out over the Seattle skyline from her modest office, Evelyn reflected on the journey. She understood now that true leadership wasn't about titles or power, but about integrity, courage, and the willingness to stand firm when it mattered most. She was no longer just the architect of a system. She was becoming the architect of change. Evelyn Monroe sat at her desk in the small but sunlit office she had rented on the 11th floor of a downtown Seattle building. The view overlooked the glimmering waters of Puget Sound, but her mind was focused inward, on the future she was about to build. One carefully crafted from lessons learned and battles won. The storm at Fortis Technologies had passed, but the ripples it left behind were still shaping her path. For years, Evelyn had poured herself into Fortis's systems, the quiet backbone of a company that never truly saw her worth until she controlled the power to bring it all to a halt. The licensing standoff and the eventual settlement had shifted the dynamics dramatically. But Evelyn knew one thing clearly: she was done being undervalued. Done waiting for recognition from companies that saw her as replaceable. It was time to create something on her own terms. The seed had been planted during those long, reflective nights after the crisis, when she wasn't just fixing code or drafting contracts, but imagining a company where expertise was celebrated, where the quiet heroes were seen and heard, where intellectual property was respected, and where people didn't have to fight just to exist. The company she envisioned wasn't about flash or hype. It was about clarity, legacy, and genuine innovation. She named it Foundry Insights, symbolizing a place where raw ideas could be molded into lasting structures and where every contribution had weight. Word traveled fast. Within days of the announcement, two of her closest former colleagues reached out, eager to join the venture. Grace and Leo, talented engineers who had grown weary of corporate games, wanted to build again, not just software, but a culture of respect and shared success. Evelyn welcomed them with open arms. "This is about more than code," she told them during their first meeting. "It's about building something that honors every line, every late night, every quiet victory that usually goes unnoticed." The early days were a whirlwind of activity and discovery. Without the sprawling resources of a large corporation, every decision was intentional and personal. Evelyn drafted clear contracts with strong intellectual property clauses to protect both the company and its people. She set firm expectations for transparency and credited every contributor fairly. Most importantly, she fostered an environment where voices mattered. Weekly one-on-one meetings weren't just about performance reviews but about mental health, personal growth, and aspirations. Foundry Insights wasn't just a workplace, it was a community. Applications poured in, burnt-out developers, mid-level engineers who had been sidelined in previous roles, and fresh talent hungry for real opportunity all wanted in. Each resume carried a story of struggle, resilience, and hope. One afternoon, as Evelyn walked through the modest office space, she overheard two junior developers chatting quietly. "Evelyn actually listens," one whispered. "She gets it." A smile tugged at Evelyn's lips. That was the point. She wasn't building an empire. She was creating a sanctuary for those who had been overlooked, underestimated, or erased. A place where systems weren't just about technology but about people. Meanwhile, the legacy of Fortis lingered. The licensing deal meant that Evelyn was still involved as a consultant for 90 days, overseeing the transition and ensuring the system's stability. It was a reminder that her expertise was still in demand, but this time on her terms. Balancing both worlds was challenging, but Evelyn embraced it. She was no longer a cog in a corporate machine but a leader steering her own ship. The late nights spent entangling complex code or mentoring her team felt different now, fulfilling rather than draining. As Foundry Insights grew, Evelyn found herself invited to speak at industry events, not as a corporate spokesperson, but as a trailblazer redefining what leadership in tech could look like. Her story resonated with many, especially women and those who had quietly built the infrastructures that powered companies but rarely received credit. But Evelyn remained grounded. Recognition wasn't the goal, legacy was. She wanted to create systems, both technical and cultural, that outlasted any individual or trend. Her vision was clear: a tech community where integrity, respect, and expertise formed the foundation for innovation. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Evelyn stood by the window of her new office. The city lights flickered through the fog, mirroring the spark of hope inside her. She thought about the journey, from the quiet architect dismissed by a ruthless CEO to the founder of a company that valued the quiet strength of its people. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but Evelyn was ready. This was her moment to lead, to build, and to be seen, not for the titles she held or lost, but for the legacy she was creating. And for Evelyn Monroe, that was everything. Evelyn Monroe's journey had been anything but linear. From the quiet architect who had painstakingly built Fortis Technologies' core systems to the powerful consultant and founder of Foundry Insights, every step was a testament to resilience, strategy, and growth. But true growth isn't just about external success, it's about the inner transformation that allows someone to own their worth, redefine their identity, and inspire others. In the early days of launching Foundry Insights, Evelyn found herself confronting not only the challenges of building a business but also the personal shadows she had carried for years. For so long, she had measured her value by the systems she built and the approval of others. The unexpected firing by Lucas Grant had shaken her, but it had also forced her to confront a deeper truth. Her worth wasn't defined by a title or by others' recognition, it came from within. She remembered the nights when she doubted herself, when the loneliness of corporate politics felt suffocating, and when her contributions were overlooked. Those feelings didn't disappear overnight, but instead of letting them consume her, Evelyn chose to learn from them. She embraced vulnerability as a strength. During team meetings at Foundry Insights, she shared parts of her story, how she had been underestimated, dismissed, and yet refused to be erased. This openness created an atmosphere of trust and authenticity. Her team saw not just a leader but a human being who understood struggle and growth firsthand. Mentoring became one of Evelyn's greatest passions. She made it a priority to meet regularly with her engineers, not just to review code or projects, but to discuss their career goals, fears, and dreams. Many had faced similar obstacles, being passed over, undervalued, or burned out. Evelyn's journey gave them hope and a blueprint for navigating the complex tech world. One afternoon, during a one-on-one with a junior developer named Maya, Evelyn saw a reflection of her younger self. Maya was talented but hesitant, unsure if she belonged in an industry dominated by louder, flashier voices. "Your work matters," Evelyn told her gently. "Your voice matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." That simple affirmation sparked a transformation in Maya, who began to take on more responsibility and advocate for herself. Moments like these reminded Evelyn that growth was contagious. But growth wasn't just about nurturing others, it was about continuing to challenge herself. Evelyn dedicated time each week to learning new technologies, exploring leadership philosophies, and reflecting on her own biases and blind spots. She sought feedback openly, recognizing that no one was ever truly finished evolving. The transition contract with Fortis also pushed Evelyn to stretch her leadership skills. Entangling messy legacy code, navigating corporate politics as an external consultant, and balancing her startup's demands tested her patience and adaptability. Yet, she thrived in the complexity, seeing every challenge as an opportunity to deepen her expertise and influence. Evelyn also began to redefine what success meant to her. No longer was it about climbing corporate ladders or chasing titles. It was about impact, creating sustainable systems, fostering inclusive cultures, and empowering individuals to own their stories. Her personal life blossomed alongside her professional growth. With more control over her schedule, she spent quality time with her daughter, nurturing their bond and modeling resilience and integrity. Evelyn realized that being whole meant integrating all parts of her life, not compartmentalizing work and family. As Foundry Insights grew, Evelyn found herself at the intersection of technology and humanity. She championed initiatives that prioritized mental health, diversity, and work-life balance, recognizing that the best innovations arise from teams that feel safe, valued, and inspired. The industry began to take notice. Invitations to speak at conferences, write articles, and consult on diversity and leadership flooded in. But Evelyn remained grounded, always returning to her core mission, building a place where every quiet strength was seen and celebrated. Reflecting on her journey, Evelyn understood that growth wasn't about never falling, it was about rising stronger each time. It was about owning one's narrative, setting boundaries, and leading with both courage and compassion. She often thought back to the moment when Lucas fired her without knowing the true power she held. That moment, once a source of pain, had become the catalyst for her transformation. Evelyn Monroe was no longer just the architect of systems. She was the architect of her own life, a life built on strength, clarity, and unwavering purpose. And as she looked toward the future, she knew the best was yet to come. Evelyn Monroe stood in front of a packed auditorium at a prestigious technology conference in Seattle. The room buzzed with anticipation. Engineers, entrepreneurs, and executives from across the country had gathered to hear her speak, not just about code or architecture, but about resilience, leadership, and the power of quiet strength. As she looked out at the sea of faces, Evelyn's mind flashed back to the days when she was the unnoticed architect buried in layers of code, overlooked by a CEO who dismissed her without understanding what she truly brought to the table. The memory stirred a fire within her, not of anger or bitterness, but of fierce pride and hard-earned wisdom. She began her speech with a simple question. Have you ever been underestimated? Dismissed before you had a chance to prove your worth? I have. The room grew silent, captivated by her honesty. Evelyn shared her story, not the polished version, but the raw truth of being sidelined despite holding the keys to the company's lifeblood. She spoke of the moment she was fired, the storm that followed, and the quiet strategy she used to reclaim her power. But most importantly, she spoke of what came after, the growth, the opportunity, and the realization that true strength often lives in silence. Her voice carried a mix of vulnerability and conviction as she said, "Power isn't just about titles or corner offices. It's about knowledge, integrity, and the courage to stand firm when no one is watching." She told the audience about Foundry Insights, the company she built from the ground up, a place where every voice mattered, where intellectual property was respected, and where people didn't have to fight just to be seen. She described how creating that space transformed not only her life but the lives of everyone who joined her. Legacy isn't loud, Evelyn said. It's built in the quiet hours. Behind every system you hold together, every code you write, every challenge you overcome, recognition may not come from applause, but from knowing your worth. Her words struck a chord. She wasn't just a tech leader, she was a beacon for anyone who had ever felt invisible, undervalued, or erased. After the speech, Evelyn was approached by dozens of attendees, women and men, young and seasoned, who thanked her for sharing her truth. Many confided their own struggles, inspired by her journey to reclaim power with dignity and strategy. That night, as Evelyn walked out of the conference center into the cool Seattle air, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had turned pain into purpose and setbacks into stepping stones. Back at Foundry Insights, the energy was electric, the team was growing, ideas were flourishing, and the culture was thriving. Evelyn had created more than a company, she had sparked a movement. She remembered a conversation with Maya, the junior developer she had mentored. Maya had told her, "You showed me that strength isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about standing steady when the world tries to push you down." Evelyn smiled, knowing that this was the real legacy she was building. The industry was slowly changing. Stories like hers were breaking through the noise, reshaping what leadership and success meant. And Evelyn was at the heart of that transformation. She often reflected on the moment she walked away from Fortis Technologies, not as a defeated employee, but as a woman who had quietly set the terms, claimed her power, and changed the game forever. Her final words to the conference audience echoed her journey. To anyone who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased, your work matters. Your story matters, and your name deserves to be in the credits. Stand tall, own your worth, and never let silence be mistaken for weakness. As the applause filled the room, Evelyn knew her story was far from over. It was only the beginning of a legacy rooted in quiet strength, strategic resilience, and unwavering integrity. And in that moment, she was exactly where she was meant to be. True strength often lies in the quiet persistence behind the scenes, the unseen hours, the unrecognized effort, and the courage to stand firm when no one is watching. Evelyn Monroe's story teaches us that power is not about titles or loud declarations but about knowing your worth, protecting your contributions, and being strategic in reclaiming your space. When others dismiss or underestimate you, remember that your value is defined by your integrity and the foundation you build, not by external approval. Ownership of your work, your boundaries, and your story is the key to lasting impact. Leadership is not about ego but empathy, humility, and the willingness to challenge the status quo with grace and resolve. Protect what you build, give credit where it's due, and create spaces where everyone's voice can be heard. In everyday life, whether at work or in personal projects, it's essential to document your contributions clearly. Understand your rights, like intellectual property or contractual terms, and communicate assertively. Don't wait for recognition. Be proactive in claiming what's yours. Build relationships based on trust and mutual respect. Advocate not only for yourself but for those whose voices are quieter. When faced with setbacks, approach challenges strategically, planning your next moves calmly and confidently. Remember, your legacy isn't measured by applause but by the steady impact you leave on systems, teams, and people. Quiet strength can change the game. Thank you for choosing to listen to this story among thousands of stories out there. Like and subscribe to continue listening to the latest stories.